Hello, everyone. Welcome to the OEC webinar. I see people are coming in, so we're just going to wait a couple of minutes until we have about 183 people that have registered. And as of right now, we have 28 people and people are coming in. So if you can be patient with us for a few minutes, we'll make sure that we have everyone that's going to come in the next couple of minutes, and then we'll get started. Our guest today is Olivia Gambelin. Am I pronouncing it right, Olivia?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay,
that's good.
Awesome. And this is such a timely and so important topic. I really appreciate you for rescheduling and being here again. I know people want you everywhere, so I don't know how you do it. It's like, I see you online and you're like in Europe, and then you're back here in your room. I don't know how you get some sleep.
I'm headed to Asia next week too, so I am quite literally all over the world.
Oh my goodness. Well, so thank you. Thank you for making the time and joining us today. All right. So yeah.
I was going to say thank you. I'm thank you for being able to reschedule this. It was one of those days where everything didn't quite go right.
Right. No, and I'm glad you had the time to join us. And we had the time this Friday anyway, so we're good. So thank you. Thank you again. All right. So let's get started. So I will start by just telling you a little bit about us and then introducing our guest. And we'll begin. So my name is Azita Hirsa. I'm a senior lecturer at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute School of Engineering in the Industrial and Systems Engineering Department, where I teach courses in management of engineering and technology, ethics of modeling, engineering ethics, professional development, technical issues and solutions, and enhancing critical thinking for our engineers. I was the past chair of the ethics division at the ASEE, the American Society of Engineering Education, and I'm thrilled to be the webinar host for the OEC's 24-25 season. I got on last year, and so last year our theme was of ethics in industry and talking about engineering and science ethics in industry. And we've continued with that. And our most popular topic and most timely topic has been AI. So I hope you'll enjoy today's discussion. The Online Ethics Center, hosted at the University of Virginia, is a digital repository for resources on teaching and learning about ethics in engineering and science. The OEC also fosters a community of faculty, students, researchers, and other professionals who come together to discuss ethics. Please check out our website at onlineethics.org. As I said, the theme of our fall-spring webinar series is engineering ethics in industry, and I'm delighted to host our speaker today, Olivia Gambelin. One of the first movers in responsible AI, Olivia Gambelin is a world-renowned expert in AI ethics and product innovation whose experience in utilizing ethics by design has empowered hundreds of business leaders to achieve their desired impact on the cutting edge of AI development. Olivia works directly with product teams to drive AI innovation through human value alignment, as well as executive teams on the operational and strategic development of responsible AI. Olivia is the author of the book, Responsible AI, Implement an Ethical Approach in Your Organization, with Kogan Page Publishing. Responsible AI readers step-by-step guides readers step-by-step through the process of establishing robust yet manageable ethical initiatives for any size organization, outlining the three core pillars of building responsible AI strategy: people, process, and technology. It provides the insight and guide needed to help leaders fully understand the technical and commercial potential of ethics in AI, while also covering the operations and strategy needed to support implementation. As the founder of Ethical Intelligence, the world's largest network of responsible AI practitioners, Olivia offers unparalleled insight into how leaders can embrace the strength of human values to drive holistic business success. She's the creator of the Value Canvas, co-founder of Women Shaping the Future of Responsible AI, and the site is WSFR.ai, founding editorial board member of Springer's Nature's AI and Ethics Journal, and sits as an advisor for the Ethical Governance Group, EAIGG, and the Data Tank. She has advised various organizations from Fortune 500 Series A startups across the healthcare, financial, and media sectors in utilizing ethics as a decision-making tool for success in artificial intelligence. Olivia splits her year between San Francisco, where she is an active member of the Silicon Valley's ecosystem of startups and investors, and Brussels, where she advises on AI policy and regulation. After Olivia's talk, we will take questions. To ask a question, please type in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat box, and I will read the questions to her. Audience members will not be able to use their mics and cameras. So thank you so much for being here and discussing this incredibly important topic with us. It's all yours.
Absolutely. Thank you, Azita. And happy Friday to everyone. I am on the Brussels side of my year, so it is evening for me. I think the sun will stay up long enough that I'm not going to be sat in the dark by the end of this webinar, but we'll find out. We went through daylight savings here in Europe last Sunday, so I'm still remembering what time the sun sets. But this is a great way to wrap up my week, and hopefully wherever in the world you are, either start the end of your week or wrap yours up as well. So we're going to be talking today about responsible AI. I call it responsible AI by design. Really what we're going to be focusing on is how you translate these ethical principles into practice, what that means in action rather than just in name. So we're going to dive right in. Good. I can't see my mouse, so I was hoping that the click would work, and we're ready to go. So to start, I actually want to start with a story. And this is a story of two carpenters. Now, every carpenter needs to learn how to hammer a nail. And these two carpenters, they're learning the art or the practice of carpentry, let's say. Now, the first carpenter is taught how to hammer the nail by being given the nail and the hammer, and are told you take the top part of the nail and you take the top part of the hammer and you swing your arm. They're taught the action of how you hammer a nail, very specific, down to the detail. That's the first carpenter. The second carpenter, though, isn't taught the action of hammering the nail. They're taught the hammer as a tool. They're shown, here is one side of the hammer. You can use it to apply a push force. Here's the other side of the hammer. You can use it to apply a pull force. They're taught quite literally how the hammer works as a tool to use different forces. Great. First day of training, carpenters go home, they come back the next day, and you want to test to make sure that they retained their knowledge, that they learned how to hammer a nail. So you give both of these carpenters a nail, a hammer, and a block of wood. And you ask, please hammer the nail into the wood. So you have both the carpenters, they have no problem. They pick up the hammer, they hammer in the nail. Both of them know how to hammer a nail. Now, though, you ask them, well, can you please remove the nail from the wood? Now, the first carpenter wasn't taught that action. They didn't know what to do. So they're sat there going, well, I thought that's what we were learning today. I don't know how to do that. I wasn't taught that action. The second carpenter, though, that was taught the tool, they have no problem. They flip over the hammer and they pull out the nail because they were taught the tool. I tell you this story because this is how I teach ethics and responsible AI. I'm not going to teach you specific actions. I'm not going to teach you, hey, these are the exact metrics that you look at in a data set to ensure against gender bias. This is the type of explainability model that you need in order to have the right degree of transparency. This is not the responsibility matrix that you need in order to be able to explain who is responsible for what outcomes of an algorithm. Those are very specific actions. If I teach you those actions, then all you know are those actions. And unless you run across those exact use cases and that exact context, those actions aren't going to be very helpful. However, instead, I focus on teaching you how to use responsible AI and ethics as a tool, like the hammer itself, so that no matter the context or the occasion that you find yourself in, you know the tool and you know how to use it. So you can apply it as you go throughout your work, your studies, however in life. So I set the stage there to give you an understanding. We're not talking about specific actions. If you have specific questions though, please put them in the chat and I can answer those after. Instead, I want to focus on the tool. Now, what is this tool? Tool is ethics. I want you to spend a second here though and try and define ethics for yourself. Do you have a definition that comes to mind? Can you answer this? And I like to prompt you to ask yourself, do I know what ethics is? Because it's one of those words and one of those terms that all of us, we have this assumption that we know. And it's true. Ethics is something that's very human. It's a very human practice. And so it feels like second nature to us. However, we don't often sit down and say, well, what is ethics? We're more acting on the assumption of, well, I know what it is, you know what it is. We may have different definitions though. So I always like to ask, do you know what ethics is? Can you define what you take almost for granted as just something as a part of your day? Now, me as an AI ethicist, I have a very specific definition for ethics that I work with. And that is that ethics is a decision analysis tool. What I mean by this, when it comes to ethics, ethics is the practice and the habit of aligning your decisions with your values. So you have your values, you have your ethical principles, and you are analyzing your decisions for whether or not they align with those values. Your values keep you pointed in the direction of your purpose, of your end goals, your objectives. So this also works the same in AI. We're taking these key decisions, whether those are development decisions, design decisions, even if it's decisions around, say, the use case or the business model, if we're really taking say, an AI solution to market, we're analyzing those key decisions, the ones that really make or break an AI tool. And we analyze those for whether or not they are in alignment with our values. Are they protecting? Are they aligning? Do they go counterproductive? Are they getting us closer towards those goals? So that's how I define ethics, specifically in the case of artificial intelligence, but also in life. The reason I define it like this, instead of leaving ethics as this abstract feeling or abstract notion, I like to make it very specific. It is a tool. We are analyzing decisions, and that alignment is crucial. So that's ethics. Now, what is AI ethics and what is responsible AI? I should have warned you we had to start with a couple of definitions before we could dive all the way in. Oftentimes in both industry and academia, we're using AI ethics and responsible AI interchangeably. Typically, you'll hear responsible AI, that term used more often in industry. That is the umbrella term for all of these different aspects of AI governance, risk and safety. Sometimes AI ethics gets thrown in underneath that, but responsible AI is that industry term of basically doing good with AI, let's say, in the industry, versus AI ethics is something slightly different. It's a different practice. And how I break these two down. AI ethics is specifically focusing on values. When you are using AI ethics, when you're doing that practice, you are designing for values. You are looking at ethical principles, ethical values, and you are ensuring that those are embedded into a system. Versus responsible AI, you're just developing responsibly. There's nothing ethical necessarily about responsible development. It just means you're doing what needs to be done in order for a system to work. This is an important distinction that often goes a little bit unnoticed. AI ethics has anything to do with principles. Responsible AI is good business practice, good development practice. A story that I like to use here, or a metaphor I like to use here to help get our minds around it, is dishwashing. So all of us as adults, we wash dishes, whether that is by hand or with a dishwasher, you need to do the dishes. That is what is considered being a responsible adult. You do your dishes. Now, there's literally nothing ethical about that. You are doing the dishes because it keeps a household functioning. It keeps your apartment clean. It keeps you doing the things that you need to do in order to function. You're just being responsible. However, let's say that you live with a partner and you and your partner switch off what days of the week you do dishes. And let's say tonight is your partner's turn to do the dishes, and you come home, but you realize that your partner is very stressed. They had a hard day at work. Everything, it's just a bad day, and they're really down in the dumps. So you say, out of compassion, I will do the dishes. You're not being a responsible adult. You're being compassionate. You are acting on a specific value, that value being compassion. So I like to show this as a difference. Responsible AI, you're just doing what you need to do. These are set standard development practices. There's nothing special about them. It's just good business practice. AI ethics is when you are specifically making decisions in alignment with ethical principles and values. That's a very key difference. So, how does this all work in action? Think of responsible AI as the infrastructure that you need in place in order to be able to make decisions that align with your values. If you don't have the right business practices or development practices in place, if you don't have the infrastructure, then any decision that you make, whether or not it's aligned with your values or not, it's very hard to actually get that decision into action. So you can decide to do the dishes, but if you don't have, say, a dishwasher or dishwashing soap, you don't have the right materials, even if you've decided to do the dishes out of compassion, you still can't do the dishes. So that responsible practices, that's the infrastructure that you need in place in order to translate these decisions based around your values into action. Okay, I can't see any of you all, so I'm hoping everyone here is nodding along and going, okay, we get it. So we're going to move forward. And before we dive into the tool that I'm going to teach you, I want to take one last moment to pause and talk about a very important aspect of responsible AI. And you'll see this reflected in the tool as well. One of the biggest pitfalls that occurs in AI is viewing it only as a technical challenge, problem, solution, whatever you want to call it. Oftentimes I see teams, individuals, and companies alike look at AI and say, okay, we have a technical problem, we need to fix it. It's a technical solution that we're looking at. Now, I found in my experience, though, 9 times out of 10, the real root of the problems sits in the people and process below the surface. So even if you're experiencing, say, for example, a bias problem in a model, and you can't figure out why this let's say, gender bias keeps reoccurring in your outputs, and you're stuck and you're trying to figure out where it is, and you're using different technical solutions, and yet you still can't seem to balance back out that gender bias, you have to dig deeper. Perhaps that bias is actually coming in through the process. Maybe along that process, you have a problem in the data labeling practices that's introducing the gender bias there. That's not a technical problem, that's a process problem. Or perhaps the data that you're using is historical data, and that historical data has a gender bias already predated in it. That's a people problem. That's reflecting people practices that have that gender bias already embedded in it. So this is what I'm trying to stress here is when it comes to responsible AI and AI ethics, you're not only looking at the technology, we're looking at the full picture here. And that is key to translating these ethical values into, well, from principle to practice. Now, how does this all work in action? I want to introduce you to something called the Values Canvas, and we're going to walk through all of these pieces. I've got a link at the end too. You can actually download this tool for free. So we'll cover that as well. So if don't worry about taking minute notes, you can find a lot of this information online. I want to actually walk you through the narrative of how this full tool works together. So the Values Canvas, think of it, if any of you come from an entrepreneurial background, let me start there. If any of you come from an entrepreneurial background, you will have been introduced to something called the Business Model Canvas. And for those of you that don't come from an entrepreneurial background, the Business Model Canvas is a sheet of paper with 9 different sections, and each of those sections has an overarching question that asks you a key part of your business. Like, what are you selling? Who's your target audience? What's your business model? These are key core questions to understanding what is necessary to start a company. That's the Business Model Canvas. The Values Canvas works in the same way. The values canvas covers the 9 key points where you translate ethical values into practice. These are the 9 key impact points where you have a responsible AI practice in place. This gives you that holistic picture. Like I was showing before, we've got people, process, technology. Now, we're going to run through all of this, and I'm going to be talking to you both in terms of how this works if you're an individual, but also how this works if you're within a team or even leading a team. This is how we translate these principles into practice, that kind of strategy. So we're going to start with people, because that is always the root of AI. And I will say this over and over again. Whenever I'm talking about AI, I'm telling people, think human. At the end of the day, it's typically people at the root that have some challenge that they're facing. And truly, we have all of this AI innovation to bring about human impact. We need that bridge. It's human at the end of the day. So let's start with the people. And people, what we're really doing on this layer is we're asking who is building or using AI. So who's developing it or who's adopting it. This is quite literally the root of responsible AI. If you are a part of a team or you're leading a team, this means that you are focusing on that company culture, you're establishing foundational culture and leadership, as well as educational needs for success, both in AI and these ethical values. As an individual, you're looking at this for your own self. You're asking yourself around, are you motivated and do you have the right information? We'll go through these three categories: educate, motivate, communicate. But the key here is we're asking who is building or using. So let's start with educate. What do I mean by educate? This is quite literally any effort that is designed to upskill an individual and the practical application of ethics. So let's say that we're going to translate the value of fairness into practice. What this means is you have educational resources on what is fairness in the context of AI. What are the different ways that we can see bias in models or in data sets? This can be anything from a set of podcast episodes that you listen to, or in-depth courses and even degrees now in terms of that fairness and bias mitigation. The important part here is you have the necessary knowledge base and skill sets to implement that ethical principle. And again, we're going to work through fairness just to make it easy and give us a clear set principle to work through. So again, we have fairness. If you're working within a team, or if you're leading a team, you're asking that question of, are the people around me trained? If you are, as an individual though, you're asking yourself, do I know what I'm talking about? Do I have that knowledge base in place? Do I need to go out and find more information so that I am knowledgeable on, again, we're using the principle of fairness here. So that's the first part of people. Are you educated? From there, once you know that you have the right education, are you motivated to use those skill sets? Now, this is a very important part. You can know how to implement fairness. You can know how the right bias mitigation techniques, but do you have the motivation? Do you have the either business drivers or individual motivation to use that skill set? It's not necessarily something that's a part of your workflow at the start or a part of your usual processes. So having that motivation to engage with those skill sets that you've learned is incredibly important. This cultivates a company culture, and that activates participation in responsible AI practices. It makes it habit rather than something that's needing to be constantly reminded. So you're looking to motivate. If you're a part of a team or you're leading a team, you're designing those business motivators that reinforce using those responsible AI and ethical practices. So this is important. We're talking here about like KPIs and OKRs. I've seen it happen quite often where you have, for example, an engineering team where the primary motivator and KPI is time. How efficiently can we do this? Can we do it faster? And something like that kind of motivator can go counterproductive when you need to take take time to actually run the right checks. Again, we'll talk about fairness here. If you do not allot time and you prioritize running those fairness checks as a motivator, as a clear KPI that you need to meet or objective that you need to meet, then that time motivator is going to become counterproductive and override your motivator to actually engage with these practices. So, are you educated? And then are you motivated to use that information in action, use those knowledge bases? From there, we have the last element of that people layer, and this is communicate. This one's really important. That often goes, let's say, not undervalued, but not necessarily seems like a front-facing need. So with communicate, the question here is, are you talking about what you're doing? I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a company and have seen two different teams, two different data science teams even, that are working on the same problem, but are using different solutions and are having different outcomes from those solutions because they're not talking. Or even within a team. Let's take fairness again, for example. Fairness is a really interesting ethical value because you can define it as equal outcome, equal opportunity, equal quality of service. There's lots of different ways to define fairness. So imagine you as an individual working on a team to only discover that the person next to you uses a different definition of fairness, and you two are trying to work on the same project. It's incredibly important to be able to communicate, define the values that you're working with, define how you're finding those solutions. This also helps, whether you're in a team or again, as an individual, you be able to understand maybe there's other resources. You have knowledge sharing among peers. That communication is incredibly important. It breaks down silos and it helps foster interdisciplinary collaboration. A lot of times with responsible AI and ethics, you need knowledge and expertise from so many different directions. Having that interdisciplinary aspect, incredibly important. So I know that's a lot, but we're looking at that people layer, this root of responsible AI. If we boil it down, we're looking at, are you educated? Are you motivated to use that information and knowledge base? And then are you talking about what you're doing? Are you actually communicating about this instead of assuming everyone is functioning the way you are? Are you actually challenging that assumption and talking with those around you? So this is a core. Like as we were talking about with fairness, what I would be looking at here is, let's say, do I know the latest bias mitigation techniques? Have I worked it into this being a priority in my work? And am I talking with the people around me, my colleagues, about how I'm implementing those bias mitigation techniques? Just running through these three simple pieces, I've already translated that value of fairness, that principle of fairness, into me as a person on my personal level, into my practices and in my actions. Again, on the team level, it works the same. We're translating that into the people, into who is building. That's people. Now we're going to go up, or I guess down if we're looking at the visual, up on the iceberg, down on the values canvas. But that next pillar that we're going to talk about is process. So we talked about who is building or using AI. Now we're asking the question of how. How are you building or using AI? How are you engaging? Think of this as the structural support. You've got your root, you've got your people. If you don't know who's building, and those people don't know that they are building or using, then how they're using it, that structural support, how it's actually going into action, you're never going to get there. So that process part. In process, we're looking at something that goes intent, implement, instrument. I promise we're going to go into details like we just did in those three. But think of this as we are ensuring we have the right structural support in place to be able to make these decisions. So this is very operational. This pillar is incredibly operational. Doesn't have anything to do with the technology, if you've noticed again, only to do with the operations, the processes. So diving into this, our first element is intent. think of intent as your policies. So having intention, knowing what direction you are working towards, helps streamline your work. Let's say you are given a wide open field and told, please develop an AI model. Okay, great. That's about as open-ended of a statement as you can make. What's the intention here? What is the use case? What do I need it to be able to do? What are the clear metrics that I need? What are the features? There's no intention. Same works when you're developing with responsible AI and ethics. If you don't have the policies in place, it's like you're missing your North Star. You don't know the intent, what direction you're going in. Having that intention set, though, creates that consistent strategic direction. So while you're in the weeds and making day-to-day decisions, you always have a reference point that you can work with. So let's talk about fairness again. By setting an intention, say a fairness policy, if you're in a team or as an individual, having your intention set of this is what fairness means in my specific context. So let's say fairness in this context is developing a system that produces equal quality of service. Great. There's your intention. You have a reference point now to keep working towards. So you're making decisions towards that intentional point, and you're able to compare. It gives you a decision point that you can work with instead of having to make decisions on the fly or question if you're in line with the goals. So intent, think these are your policies. This is your strategic guidance. You are giving direction. Once you know what direction you're moving in, now we move on to implement. This is talking about frameworks. So frameworks are incredibly important because they give you specific steps to take. And there's a couple different kind of frameworks out there. I usually like to divide them into two, where you have an action-based frameworks and decision-based frameworks. Action-based frameworks are kind of like your checkbox activities. Did you do X, Y, and Z? And you're going through and you're checking off the actions. Decision-based frameworks are more around guiding your decision-making. So did you consider A, B, and C while making this decision? A little bit different. You're not necessarily checking off specific actions. You are more checking off, yes, I did consider these pieces to help lead me towards a decision. I have the decision factors in place, but these are all frameworks that lead you towards that intention that we've already established. So talking about fairness again in action, let's say, again, we set the intention of having equal quality of service. We would be using a fairness framework, let's say within your workflow, specifically within the data labeling, let's say data governance. We'll expand it a little bit more. So you have we can implement a fairness framework on your data governance processes, meaning at the point in time where your intake is coming in, how do you ensure that you have a diverse set of data coming into your database? You go to cleaning and labeling. How do you ensure that you have gone through the correct measures to eliminate different biases within that data cleaning and labeling? And so on and so forth. I won't go too far into that. But with that, what you hear me talking through is what would be an overarching framework on fairness for your data practices that aligns with the intentions that you've already set. So again, as an individual, you can have your frameworks to work through. There's a lot of open source frameworks actually out there and some great resources that are easily accessible through different organizations, such as OECD, UNESCO, even companies as well, like Microsoft, have great frameworks that are usable, that you as an individual can use, or you as a team leader or within a team can create a customized framework for your team, or be able to all function on the same framework. Again, I'm translating this in multiple directions, but the whole point here is intent. You've set your intention. Implement. You are giving clear set actions that implement your original intention. And that leads us to the last element of process. And this element is called instrument. And essentially what this element is do you have the right tools to execute on those frameworks and policies? So there's a lot of tools being developed around AI governance and responsible AI and data governance. A lot of these that you'll see are these AI governance platforms that help with managing model cards or managing dashboards or managing compliance with certain policies. There are tools out there that help you standardize, sometimes automate, and scale these frameworks and policies that are going in. So, instrument, think of that as you've had your policy, you've tested that framework, the framework works great. Now, how do you have something consistent that's not, let's say, an Excel sheet that you're constantly filling out? How do you have a tool that supports that consistent and can automate different parts of those framework implementations? Now, this is all on process: intent, implement, instrument. As you heard, none of that actually has to do with the AI itself. This all has to do with operationally. How are you building? How are you developing? How are you using AI? Okay, deep breath. We've got the last pillar now. Last but not least, we finally get to the technology. This is the tip of our iceberg. And something to stress here, it's not necessarily the case that you go people, process, technology as in blocks. You can move between these elements. The important thing that I want to highlight here is that you don't just end up focusing on this pillar alone, that you're not just focused on the technology pillar, but that you're aware of the people and process, how your ethical principles need to be translated in to practice on the people and process layers. So with that being said, we have finally reached our what. We know who is building and using. We know how they're building and using. Now we need to know what it is. What are they building or using? Now, the interesting thing here that you'll notice is on this technology pillar, what we're talking about is truly infrastructure, technical infrastructure. And what I like to highlight here is if you don't have the right pieces in place, you can't get the decisions into action. These are like your levers of change. This is where your decisions are translated into outcomes. So, creates the necessary, think of it, the necessary technical environment. You don't have that environment, that infrastructure in place, any execution on ethical principles or AI development in general is going to be next to impossible. So looking at that, the infrastructure that we need in place first starts with data. And I know this one seems incredibly simple, but you can't have AI without data. So ensuring that your data practices are in order, that is one of the most important first steps when it comes to what, the AI, the what on the technology pillar. So we're looking at your data lifecycle management. And in the case of fairness, you already heard me talking through a bit of a framework before about how fairness can be translated into data governance. That is truly what you're reaching here with the data aspect. You're looking at those techniques, those methods on your data management level for translating these specific values into practice. So do you have fairness going into your data practices? And there's many, many ways that can happen. All right, that you can go about that. The important factor is you know that there is at least a solution that you're using. From data, we move to document. And so document focuses on documentation of all related decisions to the life cycle of an AI model. What this means, kind of in two ways, actually. One is documenting the existence of models. What happens quite often with companies is you go and you say, hey, all right, let's work on your AI enablement. What models are you currently using? And I'm met with this general shrug. Like, we're not sure. we got to go talk to all the departments. So first part of documentation is knowing what models you're using. But the other important factor about documentation is you can work on developing a model. You can have a model in production. If the decisions around how that model was built have not been documented, if you leave your position, then the knowledge of how that model's been built leaves with you. So if you're not documenting, then you are putting the people around you and that model in jeopardy for actually being able to adapt and be able to come to monitor and grow. Think of it this way: if you were assigned someone else's model and they have no documentation, you're going to waste a lot of time and resources and potentially never get an actual answer if you're trying to figure out how that model was built. The documentation of these key decisions, either ethical decisions or just decisions on how that model was made, are incredibly important because it enables you to gain that layer of transparency that's necessary to be able to go in and find the problem points. So you got data, got documentation, and then the last piece of infrastructure that you need actually goes back to the human again. And this one's called domain. And domain quite literally means you have the right feedback loops in place. Why it's called domain is you are looking at either domain expertise or the domain of your end user. Like you heard me talking before, the whole purpose of AI is to drive human impact, drive impact in a certain domain. If you do not have connection, if you do not have insight into how that domain is being impacted by the AI itself, then you're disconnected from the actual outcomes that you are trying to drive. So when it comes to that technical infrastructure, you need these domain feedback loops. And it's not just a one-off. It's not a, hey, did this work? Yes, no. It's a, how is this working? How, we're working with machine learning. How is this developed over time? What I see also happen is people develop AI solutions for an industry that they have no experience in. For example, in healthcare. I ran an audit once on a project where we were working with clinicians, or excuse me, not clinicians. We were working with a startup that developed a software, an AI-powered software that supported clinicians. And we were auditing, and we found this kind of discrepancy in their in their false positives. There we go. They had a higher tolerance for false positives than we were used to. So we flagged it and said, hold on, what's going on here? And the startup came back and they said, we actually worked with our clinicians, actual practitioners, that said the false positive rate needed to be that high because of the use case. They were working on sepsis, which it is better to falsely say, yes, this person has sepsis and treat them for sepsis than to falsely say, no, they don't have sepsis and have that person die. So the risk tolerance for that specific use case was determined by the clinicians, was determined by the actual domain of people that used the tool. That, if it was left only to people that had never worked in a hospital before, would have gone undetected and would have caused incredible negative impact without the domain feedback. So that's just an example to show the importance of having that domain knowledge coming back in. So on the technology side, we have data, document, domain, making sure your data is in place, making sure you have the documentation in place, making sure you have those domain feedback loops. How this all works together, as I promised you, there is a link to the values canvas. How this all comes together. So this is, think of it like a map. You start with your specific values that you want implemented. We worked with fairness for this entire time, but you can really plug in any value there. You can plug in fairness, transparency, privacy. I've seen companies use well-being or creativity or curiosity. You get your value, you have your value definition, and then these are the impact points that principle gets translated into your practice, into your actions. Now, you can use this as an individual. You can use this as a team manager. You can use this as a part of a team. I've seen this used on that individual level when you are assessing for your own work. I've seen this used on a project level, where at the start of a project, this is part of the strategy. This is, hey, for this AI project, we'll use fairness again. Fairness is incredibly important. So for this AI project, here are our 9 solutions to ensure fairness is getting translated into this project. I've also seen this as used as a whole on a department level, where you are creating the strategy, you're creating the resources that enables teams or the people around you to translate specific values into practice. So it's a very versatile tool. Again, like I said, you can go to thevaluescanvas.com. You can download it for free. There's also use cases there as well, or excuse me, case studies on the website as well that cover each of these 9 categories. So you can see an actual solution in action and what that looks like. So great resource there. Now I'm going to wrap up here and hopefully stop sharing my screen. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to answer questions as well, but feel free to reach out to me, preferably LinkedIn. I will respond there if you message me. It may take me a few days, but you will hear back from me. This QR code goes to my newsletter. In my newsletter, I focus a lot on the intersection of human values, artificial intelligence, and innovation. So this week I was talking about what human imagination means in light of AI generation. And I'm going to figure out how to stop sharing my screen because I can't see my mouse. So hopefully I can exit this, but there we go. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was so informative. As you were talking, I was taking notes feverishly, and I have a question which aligns with the question that we have online. Jenna asks, generative AI is having a disruptive impact on post-secondary education. What recommendations do you have about how to translate the value canvas into a post-secondary context? Individual instructors wrestle with the spectrum of embracing or banning generative AI, and many universities have been slow to respond with cohesive policies, and students get very mixed messages about the ethical use of AI. I'm mostly thinking about how to teach students to apply ethical decision-making to AI use, but also getting colleagues to see everyone plays a role in responding to Gen AI in education.
Yeah. So there's a couple different layers here. Let's start with the first point of talking about generative AI in the classroom. And specifically, we could talk post-secondary education. It's unavoidable. So I always advise against doing what's the term where you say nothing, absolutely nothing, stonewalling. There we go. Stonewalling generative AI, any use of it in the classroom. It's out there. It's like we have calculators on our phones. So not necessarily the same, but if you remember back to say high school days or so on, or being all of the kids now and all the people going through that post-secondary education grew up with easy access to calculators. And so being told, oh, you have to know how to do calculus equations in your head while having a calculator right next to you seemed kind of ridiculous. Same sense now with generative AI is there are different aspects where it seems a little ridiculous to say, it's fine, you've got this tool right next to you, but you need to know how to do this yourself. Why I go down that path is it's less about trying to control the use of generative AI in the classroom, and it's more about understanding what is the right way to encourage engagement with it. So that's first part. Second part here, how to use the values canvas. I would say you can use that values canvas for your own individual classroom or within your department, and actually understanding, hey, how are our students going to engage with these tools? So like intent, implement, instrument might be, no, I take that back. So intent, what are our classroom policies for the use of generative AI? What implement, we're looking at frameworks. So when is the time and place that students are allowed to engage with generative AI? And then instrument, which generative AI tools are they allowed to use? Setting that kind of clear direction, and this, I'm just talking on that process layer, setting that clear direction helps give clarity to your students, where I know a lot of on the students' end, it's this question of what can and can't I do that they're waiting on. And the other thing that I would stress there too is the importance with generative AI, and this doesn't have to do with the values canvas, the importance with generative AI is it's shifting the focus of education off of informational recall and onto critical thinking and engagement with information. So we're no longer at a point where I need to recall all facts. I instead need to know how to check for factual check information that's coming from generative AI, and I need to know how to engage with that information once I've fact checked it. So it's shifting that perspective. So when we're talking about that post-secondary education, keeping that in mind as you are designing what rules of engagement with generative AI looks like. I hope I hit most of that question in that answer.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And this can be it can be a presentation on its own. So maybe we'll bring you back and talk to you about this. So Jaden asks, could you go through a short summary of importance of fairness in responsible AI design?
Yes. So I like to talk about fairness in terms of usability. One of the things I had to learn as an ethicist early on was how to talk about ethical values in economic terms. It's not necessarily a very natural way. It feels a little bit funny sometimes, especially when you start to say, well, fairness is good for the bottom line. But that kind of conversation, that connection is what creates the business motivator, let's say, in industry. So when we're talking about fairness, having fair systems means you have a wider user base. Let's think about it this way. Let's talk gender bias. So let's say you have a system that has a gender bias towards women. Well, women are half the population. So in creating a tool with a gender bias, what you're doing is you are limiting your user base by 50%. You are not accurately meeting 50% of your potential user base. Whereas instead, if you are working to counteract that gender bias and make that system fair towards gender, you are opening up your user base from 50% to 100%. You know, some stipulation in there, but and I'm working with the binary male female here right now just for simplicity's sake. But you have the ability to better serve a user base and a wider user base with fair systems. If you're only targeting and your system only works for one demographic and then kind of works for other demographics, those other demographics will find other solutions. So speaking in the terms of bottom line, that fairness is incredibly important to having a strong, broad user base.
Great. Thank you so much. Next question is, do you foresee a loss of diversity in original thought or creativity with the rise of AI in everyday applications?
I see a fear of that, but I also see, yes, I definitely think there will be cases of that. I definitely think there will be that over-reliance and just fallback. I mean, I ran across this trick actually the other day where in a Google search, you type anything that you want. So like, what's a recipe for pumpkin pie? Mm-hmm. And then you add at the end before 2023. So predating ChatGPT. And it's a trick to get through all of the AI generated content now. I thought that was fascinating, but this is all to say, we do have that AI content generation. We do have that narrowing of diversity of thought, but and I wouldn't even say that that's a risk. That is already happening. But at the same time, I'm also seeing some brilliant minds use this as a starting point. And it's really the ones that don't harbor the fear towards artificial intelligence and are embracing the tool, that use it as a jumping point, that say, okay, generative AI and these tools are like my way of understanding what's the baseline. And then my work starts after that. Then my creativity starts after that. Then I can move beyond that. So we're not being forced into these templates. We do have these templates that will become stronger and stronger defaults, but at the same time, the people that are striving in their careers and in their work are using it as an opportunity to reach new levels of creativity and original thought. But it really comes down to individual relationships with this technology. So I would say there's no set solution other than you need to sit down and understand your relationship with this technology first and foremost.
This is really important. You've got me thinking, and we don't have much time, but I want to ask you, who are we leaving behind in this process? I mean, you're talking about, you said, and I think the thing that, raised the flag for me is when you said the brilliant minds. Who are we leaving behind around the world with all of this as we move forward?
Yeah, I wish I could classify all of that into a short and sweet answer. It really depends on what lens we're looking through. We've got the Western approach to AI versus Global South that is just trying to build their own models to start now, versus over in Asia, a completely different definition of how this technology works. That's on a global perspective. Generationally, we've got older generations that just don't have the technical literacy, versus you've got Gen Z that understands they can manipulate their own Instagram algorithm, which is it's a completely different levels of AI literacy to start. So we can look generationally at it's getting skewed. There's an interesting report saying that women are much less likely to engage with artificial intelligence than men. So we've got a gender potential there. So it's multiple directions. There's not necessarily one set answer there. I think the importance with it is to ask that question. Let's talk about the classroom and the post-secondary education, having that question forefront in the mind of, okay, this is how we're encouraging students to engage with these tools. Who could potentially be getting left behind with this, and what can we do to counterbalance that? I think the important part, Azita, is actually asking that question and recognizing that there are multiple ways that can happen. We need to be aware of it rather than just say, we'll figure it out as we go.
Yeah, awesome. Do you have time for one more question? Audience question? Yep. All right. AI can be a powerful tool to assist with processing huge sets of data. How do you suggest formulating ethical internal policy and practice which honors content creators and enables wielding a tool that can be extremely useful in producing equitable products?
So this is actually something that I've been looking at quite a bit lately, primarily actually through the lens of the publishing industry. Publishing is being turned upside down right now. And that means any type of news, content, so on, because of the ability for AI generation. And the frustration from the individual contributors of not necessarily feeling like they've had equal value exchange when giving their information. So to give you actually a very specific example here is the journals, the academic journals out there are discussing with companies like OpenAI, will give that example, like OpenAI, to give access to their articles to train foundational models. Now, that conversation between the publishing journals and the foundational model providers is missing a very key persona in there, and that's the researcher, the actual person that has written the content. So for me, looking at that equation, the most important aspect of that entire relationship rests with the researcher. If the researcher does not feel that they are being valued, they will take their information elsewhere. They will look for other places. There will be that pushback. Without the researcher, you don't have the articles themselves. I use that as a very specific example. So to go back to your question, how to create these policies, having a strong policy for co-design, not we're going to do this and we're going to assume that you're okay with it, but actually co-design with your end user, co-design and ask, do you get the value exchange here that you're looking for? Does this work for you just as much as it works for us? That co-design that really has been missing from a lot of these developments is so incredibly important. And it's probably the most simplistic answer I can give to what is also another very complex question.
Yeah, this is incredible. We're kind of going over time, but it just tells you how wonderful this was, and really, really appreciate you making the time, coming back and talking to us. So, so thank you. It's incredible how your perspective towards all of this. So thank you very much, Olivia, and the OEC director. We want to thank you for making this opportunity or allowing us to be in this space and having these conversations that are so important. And I also want to thank our coordinator, Tracy Marshalls, who was able to join us and save the day in the back scene. So, yes. So thanks again. And the way to reach out to you is through LinkedIn, you said, and then you provided your website. So we'll do that. We will have, I know some people have asked about the recordings. The recordings of this will be available, I'd say about a week or so. We should have it on our website. So thanks a lot. Do you have any questions for us last minute for us to think about, things you want us to then think?
Oh, well, I'll leave you with two questions. And these are more, I'm a philosopher by nature. So I will leave you with two of my favorite questions that I actually love to leave audiences with. So ethics at its very core, its very root, is a practice in the pursuit of the good life. Our good life is defined by purpose, and that purpose is defined by the values that we live by. So my good life is when I am living in accordance with my values. Your good life is when you're living in accordance with your values. Ethics is that habit that helps us live by our values. So one of the questions how I translate that to AI is the pursuit of good tech. How do we use technology to live in accordance with our values, get closer to that good life, but also how do we align the development of our technology with those values so that there's purpose behind the technology as well? It's that pursuit of good tech. So what I always ask audiences here is two questions. First one is, what would the world look like if we were in the pursuit of good tech, if we aligned our technology with our values? And the second one's a bit of more of a challenge, and that is, are you brave enough to do what it takes to find out? And I'll leave it there.
Gonna spend the entire weekend thinking about that. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Thank you for being here, sharing your time with us. Thank you for making the time to be here today. And thank you again, Olivia. So hope to be able to bring you back and talk to you. So I hope you get some rest too in between all the travel that you do, but you're doing an amazing job. So thank you.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much. It was lovely being here.
Thank you. Take good care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.